You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Hello, and thanks for joining Revolution 250, where we look at events that took place 250 years ago this week. This is from the American Revolution Podcast, a short bonus episode to remind you about these important anniversaries from the Revolutionary War. This week, we remember the Continental Congress's resolution on the capture of British shipping. Throughout 1775, while the Americans were pretty effective on land, the British continued to dominate the seas. America had no navy. While Congress had authorized one, it would take some time before the ships were ready to sail. Only a few converted merchant ships were available to intercept other merchant ships trying to bring supplies to the enemy. The Patriots had no effective force to deploy against the British Navy itself. There were, however, some lucky instances to capture supplies. On November 8th, General Washington wrote to President John Hancock about the need for a legal authorization for seizing enemy property. The reason for the letter was that the Continentals had managed to capture 2 ships that had been run aground by the weather, allowing them to seize a large amount of wine and also some dry goods. Washington asked Congress to provide some legal authorization for the disposal of such goods. Congress, of course, does what it always does. It formed a committee to examine the matter. On November 25th, 1775, Congress passed a resolution based on that committee's recommendations. In its resolution, Congress first noted that the British were guilty of seizing civilian property from the colonists. They wrote, "Whereas it appears to your committee from undoubted information that many vessels which had cleared at the respective custom houses in these colonies, agreeable to the regulations established by acts of the British Parliament, have in a lawless manner, without even a semblance of just authority, been seized by His Majesty's ships of war and carried into the harbor of Boston and other ports, where they have been rifled of their cargoes, by orders of His Majesty's naval and military officers there commanding, without the said vessels having been proceeded against by any form of trial, and without the charge of having offended against the law." It went on to note that the British had opened fire on coastal towns, specifically mentioning the town of Falmouth, which had been leveled a few weeks earlier. With these things in mind, Congress authorized that any warship used against the colonies which shall fall into their hands shall be seized. Any transport vessel carrying goods for the British Army or Navy shall have its contents seized and forfeited. If that transport vessel was owned by a colonist, then the ship would also be forfeited. It also recommended that the colonial governments set up courts and commissions to judge the seizure of ships or their contents. It also allowed any appeals to be made directly to Congress. As was the tradition of the time, the captor of any ship received a percentage of its value. For ships financed by colonial governments, those governments would receive 2/3 of the value, with the remaining third going to the crew who captured the ship. For ships financed directly by the Continentals, Congress specified how much each officer and crew member would receive. This resolution is sometimes considered the beginning of privateering in the war, but that's not quite right. There would be a resolution about 6 months later explicitly allowing Congress to grant letters of marque to privateers. This resolution focused on how to divide the value of captured ships in cases where Congress or the colonies had paid to outfit the ships. Washington had already put several of these ships out to sea, but this resolution did not address the issue of privateering, which is where a private party uses its own ships, supplies, and armaments to capture enemy vessels. Congress would eventually authorize privateering, which would prove to be very effective for them, but this was not the time that happened. I hope you've enjoyed this Revolution 250 moment. You can learn more about the American Revolution by subscribing for free to the American Revolution podcast on your favorite podcast platform, places like Apple or Spotify. You can also learn more by going to blog.amrevpodcast.com. There you can listen to individual episodes or find more source material for whatever topic interests you. Thanks again for listening to this Revolution 250 moment on the American Revolution podcast.